This is our weekly 4D class that has a fairly large number of viewers on YouTube. And Darinka, if I understood your suggestion, let's go back through the material again.
Yes,
Yeah,
Thank
I commented earlier, I like this idea because I learned a lot about Japan on this trip, even though I've been there many times. And I think the background of my prior knowledge helped me see things quite differently this time. And reflecting on it, I realized that Japan had an enormous experience on the design of our house. It was there kind of unconsciously, but I wrote up a whole new little chapter for the book about the house about it. So, and spaces for contemplation was one of the things. So the house has those. Anyway, uh, should I proceed? Everybody good?
yes,
Sure.
Developing teams and leaders. I think that's really what this work is about. It's not training. I don't like the word training. I think training is a better term used for training to do a task. This is about something entirely different. And the term in 4 dimensions is sort of the core idea. And we're going to measure and manage social context fields. This is arguably one of the most powerful concepts in the work, in my opinion. The idea of a social context field influencing behavior. And, you know, Japan's an interesting study because it is a very different country than any place else in the world. And the social context field that drives this came out of three things, I think, primarily. Shintoism, the first religion of Japan, which is basically God is everywhere and everything, kind of like Native Americans. The second is Buddhism, and Zen Buddhism particularly, which is a Japanese variant of regular Buddhism that ends up having a lot to do with what they call wabi-sabi, which is really integration with nature and simplicity. And then finally, this period called the Edo period, which was 250 years under Tokugawa shogunate, which was a very beneficial dictator, frankly. And Japan had no wars, no outside contact to speak of. And in that time, this very strong social field developed that has as its defining characteristic something I discovered on this trip, that you're careful not to make other people feel uncomfortable. I always knew that they cared about other people, but this is a whole nother level to go out of your way not to make people feel uncomfortable. And the idea of human physics, and this is the notion that you take social science, which is Richard Feynman claims has no science, and you explain sort of oblique social matters with metaphors from science. And the idea of a social context field affecting people the same way gravity affects mass or magnetism affects ferromagnetic objects. Good so far? And I've got quotes in here from Peter Drucker because the Drucker Institute invited me to come meet with them in Hong Kong. And things were going fine until they asked me how I could modify my work to take it to the mainland, and discovered that I had more work in the mainland than they did. I was a one-person company and they had a multi-million-dollar endowment. So that kind of ended that. Anyway, a social ecologist concerned with man's man-made environment, the way a natural ecologist studies the biological environment. And this quote is exactly what I'm interested in, the man-made environment, the social context field. Let's take a deeper look at all this. And this is a kind of a joke, but actually something quite important. In the 80s, we were building a cryogenic telescope to measure the what's called the microwave background. You may be aware that the current hypothesis is that the universe started with a giant flash. Nobody knows what preceded it. It's called the Big Bang. And with the expansion of the universe, that very high frequency radiation was gradually shifted into 3 degrees background and detected by two guys with working for Bell Labs with a microwave antenna. And the question is, how uniform is this? And does it actually match what's called a black body? Because if it doesn't, the explanation for it's incorrect. So this is a very, very difficult experiment. That's the project scientist. In the middle of this, he comes in my office and says, I'm convinced that half the cost of a project is socially determined. Now, that would have not had an impact on me except for who said it. John Mather is a prominent physicist, a genius actually. He's got the only Nobel Prize anyone NASA ever won that came from this experiment. But this planted a thought in my head to begin thinking about this whole idea of social stuff. And this is the result. This is the data points. These little marks are what he measured. And the curve is the theoretical curve for a 3-degree black body. And it confirmed that, yes, the fact that this is the flash of the Big Bang shifted into the infrared is probably the most likely story here. And John won a Nobel Prize for that. So I'm going to tell you a joke. And so when I'm telling jokes, I'm going to show you the joke with the laughing dog image. So we'll be teasing you. John travels the world talking about his experiment. And John has more resources than I do. So he brings a driver with him to drive him around wherever he goes. So John goes to a small town in China where nobody knows what he or the driver looks like. And the driver says, hey, John, let me make the talk. And John said, how can you do it? You're not a physicist. He said, I've heard you do this 30 times. I got the slides memorized. I can get up there and do it as well as you can. So John agrees. He puts on the driver's uniform, sits in the back of the room, and the driver makes the talk. Everybody's happy with the talk, lots of applause, cheering it. The physicist gets up and asks a very complex question about the nature of this expanding universe. The driver breaks out in a sweat, doesn't know what he's going to do, then he gets it. He takes his finger and points to the back and says, that question's so easy, my driver can answer it. So what I do is and by the way, people in China talk about this. I say, this is my sponsor, and point to whoever it is and say, any hard questions, they can answer them. Okay, so far? Okay. So I like to chart our progress. The first thing we're going to do in our toolbox is we're going to make agreements. And the reason we're going to do that is that I want a very organized process for this. And I want you to begin your habit of monitoring how you keep agreements, because these are central to your perceived trustworthiness. I can't think of many things that are more important than your trustworthiness. We're going to explore this idea of social context, and I'm going to apologize for this part of the presentation. There's a lot of me talking in here and not much of you doing anything. I think of this as the time when we're fueling the rocket. We're building the intellectual basis for what we're going to have going forward. I'm going to say something outrageous here, that all these could have been prevented. A Challenger deadly explosion, which came from unfounded optimism. Basically, I'm going to talk a little bit about this. After Apollo, NASA, of course, wanted to keep existing and had no moon mission, so they came up with the idea of a space shuttle going to a space station as a system. They took the idea to Nixon, and he said, you can have one or the other, which do you want? And NASA thought about it and said, well, the space station makes no sense. At that time, nobody knew how to take an expendable launch vehicle and dock with the space station, so we'll take the shuttle. And now with the station gone, they need a reason for the shuttle, so they made up a story that it's cheap access to space because it was reusable. As reality unfolded, it became clear it was the most expensive way to go to space. So the solution was to launch more often. So NASA had numbers like there's a chance of 1 in 1,000 of a problem with the shuttle launch, put civilians on it, got President Reagan to put all the payloads in the US on it, including military. And this pressure to launch caused them to embrace unfounded optimism and proceed to launch when they shouldn't have. By the way, the most recent thing I've read about this is interesting. The booster was, of course, affected by the ice, but it was holding together until they got a very unusual shock as they went through maximum dynamic pressure. And that's jostled it loose and exploded. So they almost made it. Hubble's flawed mirror. This was about the fact, this is an interesting story too. There were numerous hints that there had been an error in assembling the measurement instrument that was used to figure the mirror. I mean, like dozens. They were all ignored because people, the only tangible accomplishment in the program was this mirror. And the idea that it was flawed was just too much to take. So confirmation bias came in. And as happens with so many accidents, people discounted things they didn't want to believe. Then this idea of Korean Airlines crashing at 17 times international norms. And this went on for 4 years. And the root cause is what's now called cockpit gradient. Having a very senior captain flying with a more junior first officer who would defer to captain when the captain made mistakes. Flying an airplane is today well understood to be a team effort. Typically, one person flies and one person does the monitoring of all the instruments. One person cannot fly a modern airplane, but that's what they were doing. That went on for 4 years. Tenerife Airport, that's after the worst in aviation history, same thing. Very senior, most senior captain in Korean Airlines was teamed with a junior officer who told him once, we don't have a clearance to take off. The captain glared at him and throttled back. The garbled communication again a second time, he remained quiet, and the thing plowed into a stall 747 on the runway in the fog. The worst train crash in Tokyo's history. The same thing, the train operator overshot the platform, and he'd done it before, and if it was reported, he'd get 3 months of retraining, which is actually punishment. And to avoid this, he negotiated with the conductor in the back not to report it. By the time he finished that, he was late, and half of Japan rides a train on a work day, at least pre-COVID. And a lot of the transfers are 1 minute. So if you're more than 30 seconds late, and I've been on planes from long distance trains when the conductor apologized for leaving 30 seconds late. People miss their connection, that also gets you punished. So you oversped and jumped the track. Then even the explosion of this reactor, which everybody's familiar with, was ignoring experts who told them those reactors are going to move up the hill because they didn't believe that a tsunami could ever be as great as it was. And finally, the MAX 737 crashes, unfounded optimism about flying a plane with no real training and covering up the fact that it had a corrective device in it. When I say this could have been prevented, how would you do it? Well, you'd take a computer, you'd make measurements of team social context, you diagnose what's going on and change the behaviors. I say it's easy because it's straightforward. And just reflect on how different the world would be if all of these things could have been avoided. Comments, questions, make sense? Nico? You look
It
worried.
definitely makes sense. It is just a level of awareness in society and human
Yeah.
behavior, and starting with myself.
Good. They all made the same error. What was the error they made? They focused on individuals' technical and academic abilities, because that's what they were used to. And they were ignorant of the fact of the power of how social context affects behaviors. So they paid no attention to it. They didn't talk about it, didn't think about it, didn't measure it, didn't manage it. And here's what's cool. We're going to be able to learn how to do this in a very short time. If you think back to how long you had to study to get academic degrees for years, you can understand this entire thing and what to do about it in 2 contiguous days. Now we're going to move into the idea of mindset. And mindset, I use that word instead of attitude because attitude has this connotation of bad attitude, which I don't think is useful. And we're going to take a look at how you can manage your mindset. Again, we're using the basic methodology of physics or science in general, which is analysis. Analysis means you take something and separate it into parts you can deal with. We're going to separate mindset into emotions you experience, the storylines that you run, and you can choose the storylines, modify the emotions, and choose your mindsets. We're going to take a look at an interesting thing, the fact that you were born with an innate personality and how that affects things. And two elements in the book we're not going to talk about: culture, because I think it's not particularly interesting, and team mindset, because it's primarily applicable to projects, especially flight projects. And I find when I try and explain this in general audiences, it gets bogged down because they don't understand project management. So we're going to omit those two things, but they're in the book if you want to read about them. Then we're going to look at 8 behaviors that set the social context. And we're going to find something interesting, that these in sequence address our deepest needs, and that's why they're so powerful. I think humans' deepest need is arguably to feel appreciated. If you're not sure about this, think of a context where you weren't appreciated and you probably left it, either emotionally and or legally and physically. And so the two things that address this deep need adequately are to learn to make a habit of authentic appreciation and to address interests you share with others. So that those behaviors address this need. And I think right up there, almost the same level, as the need to feel included, to feel belonging. That explains most of the politics in the US to me. Why do the political parties seem to do crazy things? Is because they have a need to feel appreciated by the people in their political party, and even a bigger need perhaps to feel included. So they will do the craziest things. You can see it every day in the news to meet these needs. And 2 behaviors here: to learn to appropriately include others. Again, make this a habit, pay attention to it. The other thing is to keep all your agreements. So when people trust you, they include you. And keeping your agreements is a really easy way to support your trustworthiness. Then the idea of being able to create, and the main tool we're going to use here is the ability to focus, address unfortunate realities. Again, if people did this regularly, the world would be a different place. And we're going to name the process of focusing 100% commitment. That's going to deal with that need. Then finally, the need to be able to respond to what's happening. And the 2 behaviors here are to avoid drama states, victim, blamer, rescuer, rationalizer. And the problem with these is that they give your power away, make you have no power. And next is make a choice to be accountable for what you do, what you fail to do, or what you have others to do. This is the big picture of the whole thing. And I think it really is pretty simple. And I decided one day to organize this whole thing into something you can do in about an hour to 90 minutes in what's called the context shifting worksheet. It basically runs you right up this track with a little 1-page tool. And what motivated me to do this initially was I was working as a consultant for an aerospace company, TRW, that was very excellent set of people, and discovered that they would call me to come in and pay me to solve problems for them when they couldn't do it themselves. If they could do it themselves, they'd save their money and wouldn't engage me. So I found myself presented with problems that appeared unsolvable. So I thought, just as Einstein said, you can't solve a problem with the thinking that created it. I'm wondering, can you solve a problem if you change the context that created it? So I can take people through a pretty difficult thing, and as a minimum, gain tremendous new insights into how to address the problem, and often just solve the thing entirely. And people who learn to do this report to me that they use this sheet a lot. It may take, frankly, more than 3 exposures to the workshop to get all this to where you have it in, what the airline pilots call memory items. I like this term. So when you fly an airplane and something happens, the remedy is always a checklist. And for things that happen frequently enough, and that's what they test in simulators, like say you lose an engine, the pilot doesn't have time to go get out a piece of paper or look at a screen. They have memory items. So they go automatically to do things for, say, a failed engine that they practiced. And again, they're not allowed to fly until they can show in a simulator that they actually have these things in their head ready to go. Once they do those things, they can go to a bigger checklist and try and diagnose what's going on. But you want to have these things as much as you can in memory items. You want to be able to appreciate automatically. I'm gonna tell you a little story about this from our trip.
Sorry, Charlie, do you want that before you go into the next story, do you want to take a minute break?
Yeah, let's do it now.
Okay, thank you.
On your feet.
Sometime hoor. Agt maniere van gedragsbeïnvloeding. Context shifting.
Nico, you are not on mute.
Sorry, Darinka, say again.
We heard you talk, so I didn't think you wanted us to hear.
No, it was on mute. I can't, don't know how that happened. Thank you.
So traveling to Japan is exhausting. Usually it's hard to get a really good night's sleep the day before. You're busy worrying about packing, get the right stuff. You go to the airport, the flight itself's about 10 hours. By the time you add in the ground time and loading time, you're 12, 13 hours in the airplane. And you land, in Junko's case of this particular trip, she had like a 3-hour layover to go through immigration and customs, and that's not very relaxing. Got another flight to Sapporo, which is about 2-hour flight, and got on a bus to go from the airport to the hotel. So on the bus, she fell asleep, and the driver remembered where she wanted to stop. The driver got up and went back and woke her up to get off the bus. So next day, she called the bus company and said, I want to appreciate this driver who did this thing. And the company said, thank you so much. She said, we almost hate to answer the phone. It's always a complaint. This is the first time anyone's ever thanked us for anything. And you made our day. So I want you to just reflect on how transformative it's going to be if you just pick one behavior, appreciation, and make that a habit all the time. So this is the whole picture. This is the whole deal right here. Comments, questions? That's all there is to it.
Well, we have Larissa, who is the champion of that.
Say again?
What? We have Larissa, who is a champion of that. So
yeah, that's right. Marissa's a gold medal.
No, when we will go through the whole slide deck per Darinka's suggestion, which is I really appreciate, if we will have time, I would like to really concentrate some dedicated time for context shifting worksheet, specifically going to some cases without rushing.
It's embedded in this throughout. The last time we did this, I suggested we all do this with something, and we started off and did it maybe once, and then I think the thing that makes it difficult is that we're not a team. If we were really working together on a job, we could find something that worked to do. The thing that I've done I invite you to do this yourself. When I have non-intact teams, which is what I usually have in Asia, I say, pick a situation, something like, I can't effectively communicate or motivate my children. And if you have children or don't have children, this might be something for you to do as we go along and report out what I can do an exercise with you if that's what you'd like to do. I've done it many times. If you don't have children, everybody experiences children one way or the other, I think. I think we could do it with spouses, but that's a little bit too charged. Would you like to do it with, or you got a different idea? We tried to do it with something like business consulting or something, but it didn't have the energy and it ran aground. Do you want, I think, very few people do not encounter children one way or the other. Nephews, neighbors. Does that sound like something you guys want to do?
I would appreciate if you can go, not today, but when you have time, and if you decide this is relevant and appropriate, I would appreciate really learning again your case studies from your practice, because every time when we go through that, it's very informative. But if we will not rush anywhere with the rest of the material and devote just specifically, we will probably hear. I'm just very curious to learn more about your process, how you did it in your specific practice. So
Embedded in these slides is an example from my work with TRW. And it's in here because so potent, it caused the government to pick them for the contract, even though they had a higher probable cost and a lower technical score. And a lot of my work as a consultant was engaging confirmation bias in a positive way. So that example is built in here, Larissa. I think it's a very powerful one. And I did that in 1 hour with them, with people I didn't know. So the way the pattern is that we go through that example methodically as we go through the material. And then we have you work as a group on something that you want to work on. So in some years ago, clients said to me, we don't want a generic workshop. We want one that addresses what we care about. And the idea arose to let them process a real problem with the context shifting worksheet. That whole process is embedded in here. So as we go through this, we'll be doing that. It's built in.
yes, thank you, Charlie. But maybe it's just me, but I would really appreciate you going a little bit in depth of your sort of thinking process. I know that example, we reviewed it many times, but sometimes it's beneficial to go through that again, because the point I'm trying to make. Many things you assumed, but our assumptions might be different from your assumptions. So,
I've probably done this 50 or 100 times.
yeah.
But-
No, I'm just suggesting.
But I don't keep those results anywhere. I don't record them.
Yeah.
But I've got example. Well, we'll tell you what, when we get through the material, I think it's gonna have it in here. When we get to those points in time, if it's not doing the job, let me know.
Sure. I'm not insisting on it. I'm just suggesting because you ask for feedback and suggestions. But
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, I think we got it covered, but let's see. Any other comments, anybody? Going well so far? Okay. So when I ask people to do something, I like to tell them why we're doing it. And the agreements provide behaviors that support a social context that is enjoyable. And I'll elaborate a little more, Larissa, on things as I go through it. This is the idea that the social context in the workshop matters. That's the one we're focused on managing. And also efficient. So having people follow these agreements does this, I believe, makes it more fun for everybody, makes it more efficient, and also provides you an opportunity to take a look at how you keep agreements. We're going to revisit how you kept the agreements you made in this workshop at a later date, later moment. So the second chair would write the agreements on a flip chart as we go through them. I don't actually negotiate these much. I say I do, but I don't. I just state them sort of emphatically and people raise their hands and agree. But I don't ask, just to be frank, I don't ask, does anybody want to have a behavior where nobody comes until they want to show up? I don't do that. This is kind of like a lot of this just makes sort of common sense.
Charlie, real quick.
Yeah.
Is this or has this been, as you were kind of noting, you don't necessarily negotiate, but would this be potentially an area where you could apply the developing criteria for decision making? It might take too long at this phase, but
it's not worth the trouble.
okay, that's kind of what I was figuring. But
I think if we ran aground on this, that's something you could do. It's a good idea, but that would be another hour or so.
right, okay,
What interesting is I had another lady I work with, and when she tried to do this, people pushed back on it. And she couldn't get through it. When I do it, for whatever reason, I think because I've got a lot of self-confidence in this idea, no one's ever objected to it. I've never had a person in a workshop I did, and I've probably done multi-hundreds of them, that said, I don't want to do that agreement. I mean, it's kind of like, on the face of it, it makes sense, I think. I'm not asking people to do something stupid, but
right.
that's a good point. If you ran aground, that's a good thought. That's a really good way to address that dilemma. And it might be worth the time because it would be, dispute resolution in real time. I think I'm quite careful to complete the workshop. I think the workshop has to run to completion. So I'm always thinking about our schedule and time. And so I think I might take a break and talk with the team leader about what they want to do about this. Explain to them if we can stop and process this and learn something, but it means we're not going to complete the workshop. And usually nobody has a capacity to add a day. I mean, everybody has work schedules, and so in China, I often did 4-day workshops. With the serial translation, it takes longer. They were 3 days in the US until I outlawed comments from the floor, saved a ton of time. And I can do it now in 2 long days, which teams like. Good question, thank you. So people have 3 colored cards on their desk. And I say, find your red card. What do you think that's for? And people kind of flail around a little bit, and I'll say it's for stop. And you're going to be working in small groups of 4 people. I want you to think about stopping lengthy story. Back when I took questions from the floor in the workshop, I'd say stop people who go on with this rambling stuff on the floor. This is simply stop something that's not happening. If you don't have a card in your hand and you're in a group and someone's just rambling on and on, some people tend to do, you can just verbalize red card and say, stop. So then what's the green card for? And someone will probably say go. And I'll say, yeah, that's right. So what I'm going to do a check at the end of important things and say, has everybody got it? And I look for a show of all green cards. This is what I'm trying to do here is rather than ask, has everybody got it? And listen to silence, I'm wanting people to make an affirmative action. And if someone doesn't have a green card, I'll say, come up and talk to me at the break about what's bothering you. Yellow card, what that's for, and people say caution. And I say, no, the yellow card actually has a biological meaning. If you have to go to the bathroom, flash the yellow card and go, at least I'll know you're coming back. And I don't want anyone sitting in the workshop feeling like this. And as you leave, the yellow card, I'll wave goodbye and know that you're gonna be coming back. We have breaks every hour, usually on the hour. The reason I say usually is sometimes the workshop gets out of sync, like if they need an hour and a half for lunch, then the workshop breaks would be on a half hour after that. And I pretty rigorously do this, and I ask people how long you want and suggest 10 minutes. And again, no one's ever pushed back on it. No one's ever said, you know, I'm mindful of the fact that we might be in a hotel where the restroom is limited, something like that. In that case, I'll make a different suggestion. But people seem pretty comfortable with that. And I tell people that these breaks between meetings are important time for you. You can do lots of things here. You can, this is a good time to catch up on things that you need to do back at work. And you can green card things. And then finally, this is the one that's most difficult, but people agree to it, and I've sort of built up easy ones to now. When I put a countdown clock on the screen, and when the clock counts down to 0, that you will be in your seat ready to go. And it's really interesting, people pay attention to this, as the clock starts to count down, if I see someone who's like in the other room, I might point out to them, the clock's counting down. People will actually run to their chair and sit down, following this clock. So lots of interesting human dynamics in this setup. And a green card says, yeah, we agree to that. So I used to take questions from the floor. And what I found was that a very few people tend to dominate. It's not even 80-20, it's more like 90-10. And everything I tried never got the people who are quiet to speak up. I tried rewards, I tried cold calling, I tried everything. The people who usually want to talk are the blues, and it's usually not a question, it's a statement disguised as a question, wanting to show how smart they are. And it's just a waste of time. So I finally decided to experiment with this and say, hold questions from the group until the breaks. If you want to show a red card at any time, that'll get you #1 spot in the queue. Sometimes the Chinese workshops had 300 people in them, so the getting an early spot in the queue counted. And I'll be there for you, except if I have to go to the bathroom with my translator. And then we'll talk together about whether if there's something interesting, whether we should brief it to the group. Usually I'm happy to let them brief it if they want, or I can explain it. But occasionally something comes up that I think is a really valuable new question, and if so, we'll treat it accordingly. So next, this is a really tough one too. Focus your attention during the workshop. You need to do this. The material is difficult to internalize unless you can focus. So no email, no talking with other people during the workshop. And reason for this is that attention shifting causes what's called a neurological cascade, limiting your ability to think, your cognition. And the worst is if you have to do something. So I take the cell phones, turn them off and put them away. And that's going to be hard for some people because cell phones create an addiction to dopamine, which is no different than smoking, drinking, or gambling. And I asked particularly the Chinese people have trouble with this. If I see you with your cell phone, I'd like to light you up with the red laser. And they'll agree to it. And when I hit them with the red laser on their chest, they'll see it and they'll be embarrassed and put it away. It's such an addiction that don't even know they're doing it. And if you got something really serious you have to do, show the yellow card and people think you're going to the bathroom and you can go outside and do your cell phone out there. I understand emergencies can arise. So green card on that. So then during the breaks, I want you to be using those beneficially. In China, people frequently go to sleep at their desk during the break. That's your time to make these phone calls, talk to your colleagues, and or just think, contemplate. And let's agree we're going to all see breaks as a useful time to do some things we need to do. And this is a big one. Focus on you changing you. Invariably, no matter how often I do these, make this message, someone will come to me with some reason they can't do something they're supposed to do because of someone else. And I ask people, well, what's your success in changing other people? How about, and very few hands go up, how about success changing your spouse? And again, very few hands go up. One lady raised her hand and said, I did it. I said, how'd you do it? She said, divorce. And I said, wasn't what I had in mind. Mindset is everything. The workshop is about you changing you. Hold that mindset. This is kind of a joke. If you want to change other people, the workshop to change other people's down the hall. It's not here. And what can I do about the other person? Go to Gandhi. We must be the change we want to see in the world. Do that. This is a powerful quote. That one can manage other people's by no means adequately proven. One can always manage oneself. Green card. Now I have them come up and sign. All this time, the second chair is putting these on a flip chart. Sign their name on the flip chart with their signature. And people are shocked by this. And I do this for two reasons. One is I want to drive home the fact that when we revisit these later, these are agreements you actually signed. The second is I want to get you on your feet and moving, even though we're doing the every 30-minute stretch. People have been sitting for quite a while now and listening, and that's takes energy. So how about that section so far? Did it look familiar or learn something new? Got some new insights from this? Okay.
It was a great review. I think for me, the agreements were relatively clear, but then I think for me, it's helpful to kind of have that summary. So I think this is probably a case where we miss having the flip chart.
Yeah. How about Nico? You got some benefit out of this?
Always this, I always try to relate it also to the South African context and in the bigger picture, not just like a team. So the influence of different cultures on each other. It's always things going through my mind, Charlie. It's never a dull moment.
Larissa? It's useful? Yeah.
Yes, very useful. Thank you. As always, Charlie. I'm grateful for everything that you share with us every time. Thank you.
Nico, I got an exercise suggestion for you. When I made the slide set for Japan, I began thinking about this very unique place, and again, there's nothing like it in the world that I know of, and began to reflect on how this happened. What is the social context that created modern Japan? And sort of boiled it down to three things in the end. I mentioned this earlier, the Shinto religion, which is God is everything, the Zen Buddhism, and the fact of just 250 years of isolation. And actually there's more to it, that people call Japan xenophobic. That's not it at all. In my experience, they're quite accepting of other cultures and peoples. They just don't want to dilute their home culture. And I think that's another big factor. So it'd be interesting for you to reflect on what is the history of the South African situation and what are the social context feels that events created, and try and study those and get a deepening understanding of why South Africa is as it is. And I think the answer is always going to be in social context.
Well, if I can make just what was going through my mind,
Yeah.
as you know, my focus is so much on the Nelson Mandela legacy and, you know, the role model that we have. And if thinking about what's going on currently in politics and so on, it's almost like launching the Challenger, launching the yeah, the Challenger, and you know, ignoring totally ignorance of, you know, the signs, whether it's the Hubble scope. I mean, all those examples. It's also it's so applicable to our society. They've lost track. I can share with you a video of Desmond Tutu warning the government that as we were working against the apartheid regime, the time will come that we will pray for your downfall. You know, he was warning the government because of the corruption, losing focus, losing, you know, the legacy, what they were standing for, Desmond Tutu, Nelson Mandela, and the others in those days. This is a couple of years ago. So in matter of no time, we've lost so much of that focus. And now how to create a situation where we pay attention, a higher level of awareness. So this is the B. N. Nelson movement, everything that you guys know about. And how to play into it. I can share with you, for instance, for Mandela Day this year, this is going to be a massive one. We're planning a conference for the judicial people, like judges. The judge system in South Africa is going to come together on Nelson Mandela Day. And I will be there participating. And it's all about what? Creating awareness at a higher level.
Nice.
I don't want to say too much,
Yeah, good.
otherwise it's becoming too much.
We've got 2 minutes for anybody else's thoughts. I'm going to end on time as always, keep my agreement. The social context of the US interests me. I never understood that a large section of the country never believed in the Constitution. That's complete news to me. And how radical the idea was to have a non-theological government, secular government, coming out of immigrants that had all experienced the religious government, mostly Europe, but in the preceding time, governments and religions were together, and that there are people in the US that want that. That was something that never occurred to me, and that's behind this whole MAGA movement. The US always
Are
seemed
we
worrisome.
still recording?
We still are, yeah.
Yeah.
The whole I sort of thought the Constitution, because everybody recites it, was something everybody believed in, but apparently not. And the only thing that keeps this country together is the hope of improved economic futures, and that's going away. So I don't know what's going to become of us. Anyway, thank you all.
Thank you, Charlie.
This coming Friday, we have a afternoon session with Ian Sharp. I think you'll find very interesting. If I may run over by 1 minute, I'll just tell you about Ian. He and I were doing a conference in Brisbane, a Project Management International conference. He was also a presenter, and I did a talk, and I typically bring some text copies of my book with me, about 10, and I hand them out to people that are interested. And if I have some extras, I just give them out to audience members, and it's a big audience, maybe a couple hundred people. So I just said the first 8 people in line get a book, and I don't know any other way to do it. And Ian Sharp turned out to be the 9th person in line, and he had been very kind to a conference organizer who messed up his thing entirely. And she was behind me with the books, and she saw that I actually had 2 books in reserve. So she put a 9th book in my pile, so he got one. Otherwise, he wouldn't have. So, and I didn't notice that she gave away my next to last book. So he's reading it on the airplane, and he can hear his own version of this. This is mine. He gets to the part about Covey and how the workshop was completely disconnected from everything in his most famous book. And he really, he's got a bachelor's degree in philosophy, interesting guy. It's from New Zealand. And I went over there for the company he worked for and did 4 or 5 workshops and traveled around Australia for about a month with Junko. So he still practices this sort of on the side in his own life. So I think it's going to be an interesting thing. And thank you, Nico, for agreeing to stay up late for it. I appreciate that. Be 4 o'clock my time. The reason for this is he's got a full-time job. He can't meet us in the middle of the day. And so it's his Saturday morning. So he'll be taking his Saturday morning, which is our Friday night, at 4. I think it's about 8 in the morning for him. I think it's going to be interesting. So whoever can make it, great.
You will be
Yeah,
recording that, right?
Oh yeah,
Mhm.
he's a really fun guy.
well,
I've
it's,
gotten to know him. He probably did 4 or 5 workshops for me with me in JPL over the years.
so
So
I
he's done a lot of work.
also have the privilege of knowing him. If you remember, Charlie, we
Yeah,
were at
yeah.
JPL. So I'm looking forward to it. That will be exactly midnight in South
I
Africa,
know.
but I
Sorry
can't think
about
of a
that.
better way. I can't
Okay.
think of a better way to spend my time at midnight on a Friday night. This is going to
Nice.
be huge.
Yeah, he's a really interesting guy. He's smart, you know. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you, Charlie. Thank you,
Bye
everyone.
Thank
bye.
you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.